Week 7 of college football has some very interesting matchups, including maybe the most important game in the final season of the Pac-12, and also a sneaky, almost under the radar ACC matchup. Today, we're going to be looking at 5 games that I personally find interesting, breaking them down and picking a winner. So with that out of the way, I'd like to say hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I am your host, as always, Nathan. And before we get started, I'd like to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe. Now let's go ahead and get started with Michigan versus Indiana. This isn't the most interesting matchup of all time, but it is contextually interesting for a potential Big Ten defining matchup at the end of the season versus Ohio State. This will give Michigan a direct 1-1 comparison versus Ohio State, specifically on the defensive side of the football, as Indiana defensively hasn't been all that bad this year, because I actually think Tom Allen is actually a good defensive mind. I just think he's being limited by the program that Indiana is. Like, we already know how this game is going to go. Michigan is almost certainly going to win, barring a superhuman effort by Indiana, which I just flat out and straight up don't think they're capable of doing. And it won't particularly be close either. Michigan is going to win this game. The spread is Michigan minus 33.5. The over-under is 44.5. The reason I want to talk about this is not just because I am a Michigan fan and I like talking about Michigan football, but because even though it won't be a direct comparison, it'll be more like an apples to oranges kind of a thing, it does give us a direct comparison between Michigan and Ohio State. And when you're thinking about the greater college football landscape, Michigan and Ohio State are both in the thick of things. They're both serious playoff contenders. Ohio State pretty much just has to get through Penn State and Michigan pretty much just has to get through Penn State and Ohio State, and Penn State pretty much just has to get through Ohio State and Michigan. So those 3 games, unless a nightmare scenario occurs and they all split them in ways where they all end up tied, are going to decide who represents the Big Ten in the college football playoff. I do not see any scenario where a one-loss Big Ten champion is left out of the playoff if it's one of those 3 teams. Not to discredit the other one-loss teams in the Big Ten Conference like Iowa and Wisconsin right now, but neither of those teams are going to be making the playoffs. They just don't play the games. Well, maybe Wisconsin, if they beat Ohio State and either Michigan or Penn State in the Big Ten championship game, and then their only losses to an actually really good Washington State team. But we're getting a little bit off track here. What do I want to see from Michigan in this game that would make me confident in their ability to beat Ohio State? In the offseason, I actually predicted Michigan to lose to Ohio State, but earlier on in the season, I said Ohio State is going to figure out the offense, I think, and the defense I do have questions about, but now that we're halfway through the year, I have almost no questions about the defense, and the offense hasn't actually figured it out. Ohio State has not met my expectations for them from earlier on in the year, and I think it's a fairly good possibility that Michigan is favored by like 6 or 7 points by the time that game gets played in Ann Arbor. Home field advantage usually accounts for 3 or 3.5 points, depending upon which book is putting out the line. So the things that I would want to see against Indiana that would make me more confident in Michigan's ability to win the game are pretty simple. We haven't really seen any genuine big explosive runs this year. Like, Blake Corum had probably the first one of the whole year, or at least that I can remember off the top of my head, this past week, where he broke one for like 40 yards. But we haven't really seen that big explosive play because Donovan Edwards has not been himself this year. And the longer this goes on with Donovan Edwards not looking right, the more I am going to be concerned about Michigan's big playability on offense. This is something that I have said in several other videos as well. Unfortunately, not in the Michigan versus Georgia breakdown because I decided to cut out the whole last fourth of the video that I had planned, where I kind of went into the actual micro of the matchups and talked about the offense and how it would work against Georgia's defense and how Georgia's offense would work against Michigan's defense. But I had a 40-minute video going, and I just decided I couldn't put it all in. But pretty much the only concern that I have with Michigan's offense is their ability to break a big play. J.J. McCarthy has had some in the passing game, but not particularly. Where he excels, it appears, is in the intermediate and when he's creating outside of the design of the play. The reason I want to see big explosive plays from Michigan is because when they play defenses the caliber of Penn State, Ohio State, potentially Georgia, potentially Texas, potentially Alabama, it is very difficult to sustain drives against those kinds of defenses that are in that great to elite tier unless you have a truly elite offense, which Michigan's offense is very good, potentially even great, but I don't think they're elite. Right now, that is. I think they have the potential and maybe the talent to be elite. I am concerned about just the overall talent of the wide receiving core when you actually play high-level defensive backs, but that is something that we're going to find out about this team when they play Ohio State and Penn State. So that is a question that will be answered for me. So you could say that we'll find out if Michigan does in fact have an elite offense like the numbers right now would suggest that they do. But if I see those big explosive plays, which now that Ladarius Henderson is starting at left tackle, I think the offensive line is way better, and I think we're going to start seeing those plays once the chemistry starts to get going a little bit with that offensive line. Either way, what I've seen from the offense the past 2 weeks makes me fairly confident in Michigan's ability to win this game in a explosive manner. I am officially predicting Michigan to win 42-3. Next game on the docket, the biggest game of the weekend, maybe the biggest and most important game left in the regular season of all of college football, Oregon versus Washington. So these are two phenomenal football teams. Washington has maybe the best offense in all of college football with multiple first-round level wide receivers and potentially a first-round level quarterback, while Oregon has also maybe a first-round quarterback and also two, I think, day two picks with Bucky Irving and Troy Franklin, the wide receiver, to go along with a really good offensive line and a defense that is significantly better than Washington's defense. I think the matchup of the game is going to be how good Oregon's defense plays against Washington's offense. If Oregon can get 3 or 4 stops against Washington's offense, I'm not sure Washington's defense can get 3 or 4 stops against the Oregon offense, and that is probably what is going to decide the game. So looking at the numbers for these two teams is actually really interesting because in terms of total offense, Washington is number 1 in the country and Oregon is number 2 in the country. But when you look at third down conversion, there's a little bit of a gap as Oregon is ranked number 10 and Washington is ranked number 21. And what's really interesting is if you look at the number of first downs that the team has produced. Oregon is currently tied with Ohio State for number 10, and Washington is not inside the top 50, which is very strange considering that they have the ball a lot. So what do those numbers illuminate? Well, it means that Oregon has the number 2 offense in terms of total offense and also are top 10 in first downs. That means that they are sustaining drives when they get the ball. And Washington, on the other hand, despite having the number 1 offense, being outside of the top 50 in first downs gained, means that they are getting all of their yards and points on explosive plays. And in football, explosive plays are a lot like the three-pointer in basketball, specifically at the college level, that is. So when you live by a three-pointer in college basketball, you also die by the three-pointer. So if you don't hit the three-pointers, you look like a bad basketball team. But when you're hitting the three-pointer, you look like a Final Four contender. And explosive plays in college football are just like that. If you hit the explosive plays, then you're the best team in the country, you have the best offense in the country. But if you're not hitting them, then it could become difficult to move the ball consistently. I'm not saying that Washington can't move the ball consistently. I'm saying so far in the year, they have relied on the explosive play, maybe a little bit too much. And Oregon offensively hasn't. All that being said, I think Washington's offense is truly elite, and I think Oregon's defense is maybe a little bit overrated. So I don't particularly think Washington over-relying on explosive plays, or potentially over-relying on explosive plays, is going to come back to bite them in this game particular. But I still think Oregon is going to win, and that's because I think Oregon's defense can come up with a stop or two when they need it, and I don't think Washington's defense will be able to do that. I could be wrong, it's very possible, but my official prediction for this game is Oregon 41, Washington 38. Third game on the docket is Miami versus North Carolina. This was shaping up to be a much more interesting and much more impactful game in the college football landscape had Mario Cristobal not been an absolute fucking moron this past week, and everybody's roasted him to death. I'm not particularly going to. Everything that can possibly be said about the situation has been said. He's an idiot, and I don't particularly think that he's a good coach. I think he's a good recruiter and a good program runner, but I don't particularly think when it comes to strategy and actually coaching that Mario Cristobal is all that good. Mac Brown, on the other hand, I have much more confidence in his ability to coach and put together a game plan than Mario Cristobal. However, because of last week's game, I think this game is going to be closer than it ought to be. I think North Carolina is like a 10-point better team than Miami. And I do think Miami is a solid football team. I think they're probably going to win 8 or 9 games, get to the bowl game, maybe get to 10. But I believe they're a year away from actually being a real contender in the ACC. And if last week had not happened, I would predict North Carolina to win by 10 or 14 points. But last week did happen. And Miami, as a football program, got embarrassed on national television. This entire week, people have been shitting on Mario Cristobal and shitting on this team. So they are going to come out against North Carolina and play their goddamn minds out. I think they are going to be extraordinarily focused. I think they are going to be ready to play. I think they're going to get up for this game and give North Carolina just about all that they can handle. I don't have numbers for this game. I'm just going off of pure context and pure gut. I think the offense is for real. I really like Tyler Van Dyke. Very likely to come back next year, in my opinion. And I think the defense potentially has some problems, but I think they have a surprising amount of talent. And if they can put it all together and get very motivated for one game, then that can be a very good defense. The line for this game is 3.5, and the over-under is 57.5, meaning that they actually think this is going to be a relatively low-scoring game, and I do not. I think this is a shootout through and through. I do think North Carolina actually has a pretty solid defense, but I think Miami, coming out motivated, is going to be able to pretty much do whatever they want on the offensive end. All that being said, I've built up Miami like they're going to be the team to pull off the upset this weekend. I just don't think so. I think North Carolina is legitimately one of the 10 best teams in college football, and I think Miami is probably somewhere in that 20 to 35 range, depending upon if they can figure the defense out a little bit. So I am going to predict North Carolina 38, Miami 35. This game being at home, I think, is going to be a bigger factor than people realize. Because if this was in Hard Rock Stadium down there in Miami Gardens, Florida, then I think that place would be rocking, and I think it could potentially affect the outcome of the game if Miami was at home. They are not. I think by the fact that Miami is coming off of a bad week, this being a home game is going to help North Carolina tremendously, and they are going to very narrowly avoid an upset and keep on that collision path with Florida State in the ACC championship game. Fourth game on the docket is going to be UCLA versus Oregon State. And this is a game that, for whatever reason, not a lot of people are talking about. I think UCLA is a good football team. I think Oregon State is a good football team, and they're both potentially playing the role of spoiler in the Pac-12 this year, or maybe even if they get an upset or two, could sneak their way into the Pac-12 championship game. Now, I believe that, kind of like Miami, UCLA is a team built for next year, but this year they are phenomenally well coached. They have a maybe elite caliber defense and an offense that is struggling due to the freshman play of a young Detroit native, Dante Moore. And I believe that Dante Moore is going to have a breakout game at some point where it all just kind of clicks for him, where the game slows down a little bit and he can go back to being the dominant force that he was in high school. I'm just not sure it's going to be this week against Oregon State, but it is an option. Oregon State, on the other hand, is a tremendously underrated football program with a, I'm going to be just completely honest with you, elite coaching staff. I think this is one of the 5 to 10 best coaching staffs in all of college football. Jonathan Smith, despite having the most basic name that you can possibly imagine, has done a fantastic job as the head coach for Oregon State. I think the team can run the ball. I think DJ Uiagalelei has added a passing element to this team that they did not have last year, and I think they play quality defense as well. Going back to UCLA, this starts off a stretch of, honestly, a lot of winnable games for this team. If they can win this game, they've got a real good chance at 10-2. Or hell, even 11-1 if I'm being completely honest with you. After this week, they go to Stanford, and then they play Colorado at home, followed by a trip to Arizona, then back to Southern California, where they play Arizona State, the matchup against USC the second to last week of the season, and the matchup against Cal in the final game. I think if they win this game, they have a real chance at 10-2 or 11-1. Maybe even they should be like favored to go 11-1 or 10-2 if they win this game. And if they manage to beat USC, since they don't play Oregon or Washington this year, then they have a really good chance of ending up in the Pac-12 championship game, which would be big for Chip Kelly's program. Oregon State, on the other hand, doesn't have that easy of a schedule. After this week, they go to Arizona, then they are going to Colorado, and then they are home against Stanford, home against Washington, and at Oregon in the final game of the year. However, that Oregon game on paper looks like, oh, Oregon State's a good team, but Oregon's like elite, man, so Oregon should probably win that game. Well, I don't know. That's a real rivalry now that Oregon State has a real coaching staff and a real football program. That could potentially be a legitimate rivalry. So you don't really know if they're going to be able to pull that game out of their ass. All that being said, though, they're probably not beating Washington, so I don't really think Oregon State has a chance at the Pac-12 championship this year. And I guess they won't next year either, because the Pac-12 probably won't exist. Oregon State is favored in this game by 3.5 points, but I think that's likely just the home field advantage. I think this is a pick'em. I think if this was a neutral site game, this would be a pick'em where it'd be like, oh man, maybe you think UCLA is going to win, maybe you think Oregon State's going to win. I think they're incredibly close. I think Oregon State is as good on offense as UCLA is on defense, and I think UCLA is as good on offense as Oregon State is on defense. I don't particularly think these are either teams that have a whole lot of holes in their roster this year, and they don't particularly have any super exploitable flaws either. My official prediction for this game is UCLA 17, Oregon State 23. I think this is going to be a low-scoring affair because I do think UCLA's defense is going to be able to limit Oregon State's offense, and Oregon State's defense is better than people are giving them credit for, so I think they're going to be able to hold a, honestly, at times, struggling UCLA offense in check. Final game that I'm going to talk about, even though it's annoying to me, is going to be USC and Notre Dame. The spread has Notre Dame favored by 2.5. However, like I've said several times in this video, home field advantage usually accounts for 3 or 3.5 points. So on a neutral field, USC would probably be favored by a point. The over-under is 60, which is ridiculously low. And the reason that I think this is an extraordinarily annoying game to talk about is because these are two of probably the 5 fakest teams in the goddamn country. I don't think Notre Dame is a top 25 team, and I've honestly wanted to move USC down like a lot more in my personal rankings that I put out for a while because they don't play defense, and even though Caleb Williams is unbelievable, he might be the best player in college football, the offense has shown that it can be slowed down a little bit, especially early on in the games, which is a really bad look for Lincoln Riley because it means that his game plans are not doing what they should be doing, and they instead just kind of have to ride Caleb Williams's improvisation and making plays outside of structure in order to win games. Notre Dame, on the other hand, their defense is not as good as everybody is pretending that it is, and Sam Hartman has been an absolute disaster at quarterback. I think we can safely say that Dave Clawson was the reason that Sam Hartman looked really, really good, not the other way around, even though Wake Forest has only been okay here. But Sam Hartman has honestly been the reason why Notre Dame, I think, lost to Ohio State and was a big part of the reason why they lost to Louisville. He has not been great this year, and to be honest with you, the guy crumbles when the spotlight is on him. And it's because of all those factors that I really want to say USC is going to win this game in a dominating fashion. But the fact of the matter is that I don't think Sam Hartman is going to matter in this game because USC's run defense is so absolutely unbelievably bad. It might be one of the 5 or 6 worst run defenses in all of college football. So Sam Hartman throwing the ball isn't going to mean anything this week because I'm just going to turn around and give it to Austin Estime, and he's going to have 20 carries for 240 yards and 4 touchdowns. So I don't particularly think Sam Hartman's going to matter in this game. And it's because of just how bad USC's defense is, and also just because I kind of want USC to lose because I do not want to rank them in my top 20 anymore. So I am going to predict Notre Dame 41, USC 38. And that is all that I have for you today. It is at this point in time where I would like to remind you to like if you liked the video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagreed with me at any point in the video, or if you just have something to say, go ahead and leave a comment down in the comment section below. Let's just remember to keep it civil. After all, what do I know? I'm just some asshole on the internet giving you his opinion, and I'll see you next time.